Hey, what's up guys? I thought today it would be interesting to go back and have a look at what it's like gaming on the Apple TV 4K 3rd gen with the A15 chip. I haven't looked at this machine or gaming Apple TV for about 2 years now, and I thought I should show it some love. So in this video we're going to see how this machine goes with 5 or so games, and also compare it with the Nintendo Switch. I don't know if they're completely comparable machines, but I thought it would be cool to see what it's like comparing them. So yeah, that's basically it. Enjoy the video. Up first, let's take a look at Wreckfest. In the game settings, you can adjust many video settings from low up to high. For graphics amount, you can also go up to ultra. Here is the game running with all graphics settings set to high, and screen scaling is set to low. Low screen scaling lowers the internal resolution by 40%, so it's roughly 1536 by 864 here. Although I want you to take the resolution here with a grain of salt in many ways, as it's almost impossible to determine the exact resolution. The resolution is quite low, but it's needed to provide a good FPS at high graphics. Still, even at this low resolution, we are still not seeing a locked 60 FPS after just a few minutes of gameplay. It's often going into the low 40s due to major thermal throttling. The machine goes well over 50 degrees. What's interesting is that I also tested the game on an Apple TV 4K 2nd gen at exactly the same settings. The 2nd gen Apple TV is able to reach 60 FPS most of the time, even with its older A12 Bionic chip. Why? Well, I think this is because this machine has a fan and the temperature only went up to 30 degrees. For the best performance on the 3rd gen Apple TV, I found it was best to cap the FPS to 30. This also allowed me to play at high screen scaling. High screen scaling lowers the internal resolution by 53.3%, so it's roughly 2048 by 1142. Even on a 4K display, the game still looks gorgeous, especially at max graphics. It's also worth noting, Wreckfest is one of the few games to have controller rumble support on Apple TV, which is really cool. If we compare the Apple TV 4K 3rd gen performance to Nintendo Switch, it's definitely a dramatic improvement. Switch runs at 1600 by 900 in docked mode and is capped at 30 FPS. Anti-aliasing is missing. There are low quality textures and simpler foliage. Some trackside details are simplified as well, like the crowds especially, and cars feature boxier fenders, filled in exhausts, and smoothed out seams. Motion blur is not here too. It's still very impressive that the game looks this good and plays this good on Switch. It appears to provide a locked frame rate too, never going below the 30 FPS target, which is awesome, really impressive. Up next we have SpongeBob the Cosmic Shake. The bad news about Cosmic Shake on Apple TV is that Ultra video settings are not available. You can only play up to high resolution and high advanced video settings. On iPhone and iPad, you can play up to Ultra. Handy Games told me this was due to the low RAM, which is a big problem for the TVs. The shadows in particular would lead to constant crashes with low RAM, which is why the settings are limited to ensure the stability of the gameplay. Playing at high resolution lowers the internal resolution by 53.3%. This means we're playing at roughly 2048 by 1152. I also want to stress that that is roughly. We can't say what the exact resolution is. Even with the high-ish resolution going on here, for some reason the game still looks quite blurry. Even with FXAA anti-aliasing being used, I don't really know what's going on there. The game's performance here is pretty decent, providing a mostly locked 60 FPS in most worlds on Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen. In Karate Downtown Bikini Bottom though, I noticed the Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen would get really hot, going up to and sometimes over 50 degrees, and then this would cause the FPS to drop well below the 60 FPS target. Again, I've compared the performance with the Apple TV 4K 2nd Gen, which is once again able to hit 60 FPS most of the time at the same settings. This Apple TV, the 2nd Gen one, didn't get hot at 30 degrees. On the latest Apple TV, I tested 5 worlds, and this issue only happened at this location. Visually, the Apple TV and Switch version look almost identical. Switch also seems to run at about high settings, although Switch looks to have slightly improved shadow quality, but it's very hard to notice without a magnifying glass. The major difference is that Switch is running at 1080p in docked mode and looks to use dynamic scaling. Even with dynamic scaling, the image quality looks fantastic, and I think anti-aliasing is being used much better here. The game runs at 30 FPS though, and it often drops below this target and has poor frame pacing. I found it quite noticeable. Still, despite being a cartoon 3D game, this is a pretty demanding Unreal Engine 4 title, so it's impressive that it's running this well on Switch to begin with.
I like it because it's squishy.
Now it's time to look at Horizon Chase 2. Aquarius told me on Apple TV 4K models, the game runs at native 4K. I tested the game at all 4 locations within the Vermont tour. 3 levels provided a locked 60 FPS, and it was a really good experience. I just found one level, Autumn Roads, really struggled at the start of this level. It would go down to like 40 FPS. I think maybe this could simply be improved if the resolution was lowered a little. When comparing the Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen to the Switch version, it's a big improvement. Aquarius told me on Switch the game runs at native 1080p in docked mode. The game is also capped at 30 FPS. However, there is very bad frame pacing issues that make the experience rather unpleasant. There are a range of visual cutbacks too compared to Apple TV 4K. The trackside and car lighting is simplified. Trackside detail is more basic, foliage and foliage shadows don't animate. Furthermore, shadow quality is worse and shadow pop-in is rather noticeable. For the longest time, Oceanhorn 2 was one of the biggest experiences to try on Apple TV. On Apple TV, you can play at low or high graphics quality and enable a 60 FPS mode. Cornfox and Brothers told me the resolution should not have changed since I last contacted them in like 2022, so it's more than likely that the game runs at 1080p still on Apple TV 4K models. The game is mostly locked to the 60 FPS target in most locations I tested on the latest Apple TV. However, if I was exploring the White City, the machine would get really hot, once again up to like 50 degrees and sometimes over that. I tested the performance against the Apple TV 4K 2nd Gen, and once again it's a locked 60 FPS in this location. The 2nd Gen Apple TV just didn't get hot at 30 degrees. Visually, The Apple TV 4K version and the Switch version look identical to my eyes. That being said, the Apple TV 4K definitely performs miles better than the Switch port. It looks like it runs at 1080p in docked mode, however, I believe it uses a dynamic resolution in order to try and achieve the 30 FPS target here. Even with that, it's not a locked 30 FPS and often goes a little below this. Couple that with poor frame pacing. Our last game to look at is Disney Dreamlight Valley. Both the Apple TV 4K and the Switch version look to target 1080p and are capped at 30 FPS. However, on both systems, there is awful frame pacing everywhere. Big stutters randomly occur throughout gameplay on both machines too. Both the Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen and Switch look to be running at much lower video settings compared to other platforms. Visually though, the Switch port is actually better than the Apple TV 4K version. It has more contrast, slightly improved grass and texture quality, and much better shadows. The Apple TV 4K version looks quite washed out overall and doesn't seem to feature anti-aliasing, so it's just not a very good image. Disney Dreamlight Valley is also only supported on the latest Apple TV 4K 3rd Gen. This is because the game requires, on Apple platforms, an A15 Bionic chip or later and 4 GB of RAM. This machine meets those requirements with an A15 chip and 4 GB of RAM. Even meeting these requirements, the game still runs pretty poorly, and I wouldn't suggest playing this game here compared to other platforms. I'm going to put these mixed results down to poor optimization though over hardware limitations. This is a Unity title and often mobile ports are heavily downgraded. It's the same story on iPhone and iPad, it's just not great overall. The Apple TV 4K is also a great place for emulation. RetroArch is available directly from the App Store now and allows you to emulate many old game systems. Here is Tekken 3 and Crash Bandicoot from PS1. They play great at 60 FPS. I couldn't work out what resolution they're running at though. Super Mario 64 on N64 is a treat. It hits 60 FPS all the time, although once again I couldn't work out what resolution the game runs at. Playing PSP games is interesting as I could actually change the internal resolution for games here. Here is God of War Chains of Olympus running at 1440 by 816. Here is also GTA Vice City Stories running at 2880 by 1632 and 60 FPS. It looks absolutely gorgeous here. I gotta tell you as well, it is really nice playing a GTA game on Apple TV because there is simply nothing like this on the Apple TV. So it's just really, it's really cool. And there we have it, gaming on the Apple TV 4K. Well, there's not really that much to say. There aren't many games on this system. You can play a lot of Apple Arcade games and that's pretty cool. And there are quite a few indie games that have come over from some developers and that's really nice. But you know, you're not going to find anything like what's on offer with the Switch or any other gaming consoles. A lot of that comes down to just, this is an Apple TV. It's not marketed as a gaming system. It's mostly for watching movies and TV shows and streaming things and so forth. That's what most people get it for. That's what I've got it for. Most people don't expect to be playing games on this. The main reason why I wanted to make this video is because it would be really cool if Apple made, I don't know if it's going to be an Apple TV or if they made some form of a gaming console that had the power of the Apple Silicon chip, like maybe like an M series chip, stick it in something like this, You've got a pretty good starter for a gaming system, and then put a fan in the thing, for goodness sake, because that helps with thermal throttling, and then maybe work with some developers and try and get some games on this, because this is really cheap. I went to Officeworks and bought this for $280. If Apple made more of a gaming thing for this and made it pretty cheap, I think it could do fairly well. Thank you to the developers that helped me with this video, Handy Games and Aquaries and Cornflakes and Brothers.